This is Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for joining me. Saturday night's White House Correspondents Dinner had to be canceled due to what we in America call natural causes, gunshots. The smell of gunfire was reported inside the banquet room, but it turned out to just be Pete Hegseth farting. Despite it being the White House Correspondents Dinner, everyone in the room missed the story because they didn't see it first on Drudge. I will say this about last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner. It was still funnier than when Rich Little did it back in 2007. Actually, no comedian was booked. Instead, they hired Oz, the mentalist. I told them they should have booked Uri Geller. He would have seen this coming. All the heavy hitters inside the White House were in attendance, including White House spokesliar Caroline Leavitt, who said this while walking the red carpet.
It'll be funny. It'll be entertaining. There will be some shots fired tonight in the room. So everyone should tune in. It's going to be really great. I'm looking forward to hearing it.
She was in on it. Also in attendance last night was Vice President J.D. Vance. And here is the Vice President reacting to news that President Trump is safe, perfectly okay, and returning healthily back to the White House. I haven't seen J.D. Vance this happy since his wife, Usha, told him she wouldn't convert to Christianity. For added security, FBI Chief Kash Patel stayed at the Washington Hilton overnight to make certain nobody posing a threat to the president or the cabinet could enter the premises. That is FBI Director Kash Patel hours before the White House Correspondents' Dinner is about to begin. That's him going door to door, room to room, making certain nobody entered the hotel with any weapons, due diligence. And here's the FBI Director, Kash Patel, an hour before the festivities began, examining the perimeter. And this is FBI Director Kash Patel checking every bottle of liquor on the premises to make certain not a drop of alcohol has been spiked with a date rape drug that hasn't been approved by him. And here is Wolf Blitzer responding to Kash Patel vomiting all over his shoes. Originally, Kash Patel was going to walk up to President Trump and give him a piece of his mind, but he ended up throwing up on Kash Patel's, Wolf Blitzer's shoes. The second shots were fired. Our defense chief, Pete Hegseth, jumped into action, grabbing his wooden cross and blaming Muslims. Totally unfazed as members of the press try to flee the room, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. stayed put, eating his meal while telling everyone he's not letting this fresh bear club go to waste. Bear cub, not bear club. Meanwhile, upstairs in his suite at the Washington Hilton, Jared Kushner was busy packing for his vacation to Islamabad when Steve Witkoff walked in on Jared, just as Jared was trying to figure out which outfits to bring with him to his vacation is in Islamabad. I guess they're going to maybe negotiate, but Jared likes to pack activewear. All right, this is the Mop-Up. I'm David Feldman in New York City. We're all relieved everybody is okay. President Trump, late Sunday, saying the man who attempted to fire shots at him left behind a manifesto of political screeds, and the man also traveled to Washington via Amtrak, so that makes him a liberal. That Secret Service agent shot in the chest at last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner is expected to make a full recovery thanks to the bulletproof vest he was wearing when 31-year-old Cole Thomas Allen of Torrance, California, allegedly stormed the event's screening area. 5 to 8 shots were reportedly fired before the suspect was subdued and arrested. The agent who got hit by that shot was released from the hospital later last night. The entire line of presidential succession, short of the president pro tem of the Senate, I believe that's Grassley, everybody but Grassley in the line of succession was under one roof last night at the Washington Hilton. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche was asked on the Sunday shows if he was comfortable having the entire line of succession, practically the entire line of succession, under one roof. Blanche said yes, because the system worked. He said the system worked. The gunman wasn't able to pierce the perimeter. Well, that's the narrative. The system held. But it didn't. The event had to be canceled. A Secret Service agent was rushed to the hospital while hundreds of D.C. police and Homeland Security and Secret Service agents scrambled to secure the building and all its occupants. How was Saturday night an example of the system working? What, because nobody got killed? Well, that's great news. Thankfully, nobody in the room was injured except for the Secret Service agent who was released later that night. The men and women assigned to protect the attendees and our president performed heroically. But how is last night's White House Correspondents Dinner proof the system worked? How was someone able to check into the Washington Hilton days earlier with guns, a shotgun, and knives? This now marks the third attempt on Donald Trump's life in fewer than 2 years. Let's not forget the shooter in Butler clipped Trump's ear, and Corey Comparatori, a 50-year-old former volunteer fire chief from Sarver, Pennsylvania, was shot to death. The system didn't work that day, and it didn't work last night. No other industrialized nation has normalized this level of political violence. We're so desperate for good news. And it is good news that nobody was seriously injured. But we're so desperate for good news, we call it a success because nobody died last night. No other political system behaves this way. No other political system would allow this. This system doesn't work. For one reason, our nation is awash with guns because our system cares more about the $90 billion a year industry that manufactures and sells firearms to U.S. citizens. They care more about the firearms manufacturers than they care about the tens of thousands of U.S. citizens killed and injured each year from all those firearms getting sold. There's Speaker Mike Johnson being rushed to safety. It must be nice to have that excellent a security detail. Guns don't make you safer. They only make inadequate cowards feel safer until they actually have to use the gun and they end up shooting themselves or their family. Saturday night's White House Correspondents Dinner was one of those rare examples when a bad guy with a gun was stopped by a good guy with a gun. The problem with that version of events is there were millions of dollars worth of magnetometers, police officers, and 250 heavily armed good guys with guns. In fact, these aren't just good guys with guns. They are amazing guys with guns. They're the best. They're the sharpshooters. They teach marksmanship. You can't find better sharpshooters than who was at the Washington Hilton Saturday night. 376 law enforcement officers from multiple agencies in Texas responded to the Robb Elementary School shooting in Uvalde, Texas, back on May 24th, 2022. 376 good guys with guns. It took 77 minutes for one of those 376 good guys, police, law enforcement, with a gun to take out one bad guy with an AR-15. By then, he killed 19 babies and 2 teachers. Yes, I'm glad, I'm grateful. I drop to my knees and thank the universe that nobody died and nobody was seriously injured Saturday night. But the fact that a shooter could get this close inside the most heavily fortified area in the world should tell you the rest of us here in the United States, much like those babies in Uvalde, don't stand a chance when there's an active shooter. Normal Americans at a shopping mall or inside a movie theater can't rely on a good guy with a gun to save us from a bad guy with an AR-15. Normally, when there's a bad guy with a gun and there's a good guy with a gun, that good guy with the gun freezes, not just fearing for their own life. They don't know where to aim because they can't tell where the shots are being fired from. Ask soldiers who served in the infantry. Ask police officers what happens when every second counts and your finger's on the trigger. Trained soldiers, trained cops will often freeze up, confused, not knowing where to aim. Yes, they're a good guy with the gun, but they can't stop the bad guy. So they say, no, we just need to give everybody more guns. It's like an actual episode of All in the Family that everybody thought was funny, where Archie Bunker said the solution to hijackings on airplanes was give everybody on the plane a gun. And everybody laughed at how stupid Archie Bunker was. Well, 50 years later, it's Republican policy. We need good guys with guns. I'm supposed to depend on my sexually dysfunctional neighbor who spends all day playing Call of Duty. I'm supposed to depend on him to protect me when a gunman opens fire at the supermarket? Unless they're one of the men and women who were protecting the White House Correspondents Dinner, that proverbial good guy with a gun is far more likely to hit an innocent bystander than the active shooter. Last night, a tragedy was prevented because of how many good guys with guns were proactively deployed to protect everyone in the room, including the President of the United States, before the gunman could get in the room. Last night's White House Correspondents' Dinner, however, was the most secured location on the planet. You had the president, the vice president, the secretaries of state and defense, along with countless other cabinet members, as well as all the millionaires and billionaires who make up our punditocracy. Helicopters and drones hovering above, ambulance there on the scene just in case, and of course, a small army to protect everyone in and around that ballroom. How can you say the system worked when somebody was able to get through some layers of security with a gun? But we're supposed to use this as an example of it's just what our schools need. Good guys with guns. We don't have the marksmen, the sharpshooters that the White House Correspondents' Dinner had last night. If your kid is going to an elementary school, these guys are not Mr. Hollandaise, the nearsighted music teacher with a Glock assigned to protect the entire elementary school if there's an active shooter. And yet, with all this protection, one man was able to push past a few rings of security before he was brought down. Now, I don't want to live in a national security state where everyone is being spied on, but I live in a national security state where everyone is being spied on. How was someone able to stay in the Washington Hilton with guns and knives without the people in charge of spying on us, especially protecting our president? How is it possible that they weren't able to apprehend this guy minutes after he checked in? There weren't gun-sniffing dogs on hand going room to room. You had everybody who's anybody that I can't stand in that building. You look under every bed. You look in every closet and say, sorry to bother you, Senator Graham. We're just looking for weapons. Well, those who support the Patriot Act, as well as warrantless searches, say, hey, Homeland Security can't be expected to track every single lone wolf. Exactly. So make it impossible for them to buy weapons. The first thing Trump said during his press conference in the immediate aftermath was the guy they arrested was, quote, sick in the head. This is how the pro-gun lobby shifts responsibility. They say it's a mental health issue, not easy access to guns. But study after study shows that people who resort to gun violence don't meet any of the criteria for mental illness. Mental illness has almost zero relation to gun violence, but most Americans are clueless when it comes to understanding or treating mental illness because this country is mentally ill. Yes, while mental illness may be found in some shooters, correlation does not prove causation. Mental illness is rarely, if ever, the primary motivating factor in a shooting. Most active shooters are sparked by an entire suite of external motivating factors like personal grievances, a perceived injustice, social isolation, rejection, and of course, wanting to be famous, notoriety. None of those factors have anything to do with mental illness. A shooter's primary motivation, what causes the shooting, is not mental illness. It's more likely to be acute life stressors sparked by loss of money, losing a lover or a job, or feeling a sense of declining status in the community. That's why most active shooters tend to be white men. So none of this has anything to do with mental illness. There may be symptoms of mental illness, but correlation is not causation. Americans have no idea what mental illness is because we're all mentally ill. How could we not be a mentally ill nation? Look what our leader did to the Strait of Hormuz, and we're not demanding that they invoke the 25th Amendment. We have a crazy man acting unilaterally, and the rest of us are going, oh, okay, I guess we'll just have to wait 2 more years and hope he doesn't cancel the election. So we're all mentally ill, being run by a madman, and couple that with our complete inability to think critically, and we believe either what we want to believe or what we hear the most. We believe what we hear the most. That's why money is so important in politics. The more money you have, the more your lie can be heard the most through advertising. If you repeat the lie enough times, said Joseph Goebbels, I'm sorry, Dr. Joseph Goebbels, the man had a PhD. If you repeat the lie enough times, said Dr. Joseph Goebbels, and now Donald Trump, enough people will believe it, especially when they want to believe it. That's why most Americans buy into red flag laws as the solution for gun violence. Instead of getting rid of the guns, passing an assault weapons ban, making it impossible for anyone to buy an AR-15, Americans have been talked into red flag laws, which, if you lack critical thinking, it sounds good. People like to hear only a crazy person shoots up their office. No. Now, think about your coworkers. They're not crazy. But you put some external stressors on Bob in accounting, financial stress, maybe a wife that left him, and a boss who's riding Bob a little too hard, the last thing you want in Bob's hands is a gun. A person who snaps is not crazy. They're having a really bad day, which is why you don't want anyone near guns. Shooters are having a bad day. That's it. That's what studies show. But gun manufacturers want to blame everyone but the guns. And by calling active shooters crazy and mentally ill, that gives the American people a convenient scapegoat for the gun manufacturers who should be blamed for every shooting, as well as the gun lobbyists and the politicians who take money from them. Republicans say we need to spot the shooter before he shoots. Red flag laws, they say, help law enforcement identify the people most likely to fire a gun before it's fired. Sounds great, right? But mental health experts say it's impossible to identify a shooter before he, not she, he begins shooting. Red flag laws are just another way to stigmatize mental illness, while at the same time giving more power to one of society's most violent and mentally ill subsets, the local police. You really want your local police force making the determination on which one of us is going to shoot up the shopping mall? How about this guy, ICE agent Jonathan Ross? Remember him? He allegedly killed Renee Good, and as she lay dying, was caught on his own cell phone calling her an effing bitch. You think he should be enforcing red flag laws, making determinations and recommendations on who is too mentally unsound to own a gun? Or these limp noodles from Border Patrol who executed an ICU nurse, Alex Preddy, on the streets of Minneapolis. You think these law enforcement officials should be tasked with enforcing red flag laws, assessing the mental fitness of prospective gun owners, or taking away guns from somebody who they've determined is mentally ill? Well, people say they're just the enforcers. They're only making recommendations and then enforcing those recommendations after those recommendations have been approved by a judge. Ultimately, a judge will decide who's mentally fit and who isn't. Really, because we have plenty of judges and there are no backlogs. We have plenty of judges to go over everybody who's been turned in by their neighbor. Everybody who suddenly decides my neighbor is a danger to the community. The judges will decide, maybe somebody like Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who was accused of rape by several other women, but the FBI refused to act on those tips. You think rageaholic Brett Kavanaugh, who likes his beer, who just ruled that Border Patrol officers can stop people based on their ethnicity, accent, and language they speak, you think Brett Kavanaugh should make the final determination on who is mentally sound? Again, this whole country is mentally ill, and it's impossible to find a mental health care professional who takes your insurance. That's why most Americans are either self-medicating or taking pills for depression and anxiety prescribed by a physician with no background in psychiatry or psychology. That's all you get here in the United States when it comes to mental health treatment. That's why this entire country is mentally ill. And we're being run by a lunatic. We have a lunatic sitting in the Oval Office with the keys to our military. Well, if you want to pass red flag laws nationwide and say anybody who's mentally ill can't own a gun. I say go for it so long as you decide the entire country is too mentally ill to own a gun, because we are. Otherwise, if you're not going to do that, stop calling gun shootings a mental health problem. Yes, more people die from self-inflicted gunshot wounds than from homicides. But those suicides are not a mental health issue. They're a gun issue. Here's the thing, though. I make perfect sense. I'm correct. You cannot argue with me. But if you make billions selling guns to the American people, you will come up with any excuse and lie to blame everyone and everything other than your guns. That's how you feed your family. You will say, do, and lie to protect your fortune, the same way the oil companies or the cigarette companies either blame somebody else or claim there's nobody to blame because global warming is a hoax. And, cigarettes, the jury's still out. They haven't been able to prove that cigarettes still cause cancer. That's what they're claiming. There are still people, scientists, paid to say, we're not so sure it's cigarettes that cause cancer. This is what happens to political discourse when corporate America controls the narrative. And now you're not even allowed to politicize a shooting right after it happens. Well, there's a shooting at least once a day. So by that extension, you're never allowed to politicize a shooting. We're always told now is not the time to discuss gun laws when families are still grieving. Well, they're grieving because you won't discuss gun laws in this country. My listeners, for the most part, they don't want to hear about it. Most people do not want to talk about guns anymore because they all figure we've lost. We've lost, well, not Letitia James. She put the National Rifle Association pretty much out of business. So if Letitia James, the Attorney General of the state of New York, pretty much put the National Rifle Association out of business and exposed them for what they are. Of course, it didn't get the coverage it deserved, except on this show. You got to wake up and start going after the gun manufacturers. Who do you think caused the Strait of Hormuz to get shut down? Steve Scalise, the Louisiana House Republican Majority Leader, was at the dinner last night. You might remember he almost bled out after getting shot during a congressional baseball team practice. Several good guys with guns were there, but he still almost died. And what do Republicans say when you bring that up? Hey, Scalise was shot by a Bernie Sanders supporter. So, Bernie Sanders supporters shouldn't be allowed to buy guns either. This is what passes for discourse in this stupid country. Erica Kirk was also at the White House Correspondents Dinner Saturday night. There were good guys with guns at the college event where her husband was assassinated last fall. Couldn't stop it. And of course, Bobby Kennedy Jr. was also at the event Saturday night. Plenty of good guys with guns surrounding his uncle and his father, but they still got assassinated. And how do you think those three are holding up today? How do you think Erica Kirk, Bobby Kennedy Jr., and Steve Scalise are holding up today after what they went through last night? How do you think their mental health is today? You see, guns don't just maim and kill, they leave permanent scars on the loved ones, as well as witnesses, people who witness a gun violence are permanently scarred. You don't need to get shot to be a victim of gun violence. How many of you are suffering right now because someone close to you was the victim of gun violence? That's only a question, of course, for my American audience. I will tell you, everyone in America has personally been affected by gun violence. We all know at least one person close to us affected by gun violence. Not in Europe. People in Europe can't say the same thing. It's estimated that in 2024, about 45,000 Americans died from gun-related injuries. About half of those are suicide. So 45,000 Americans dying from guns. During the Vietnam War, would you like to venture a guess as to how many American soldiers died in combat? Now, I know my baby boomers or older know the answer to that question, but I'm talking to the younger audience right now. So I'm going to give you half an answer. I'm going to give you half the answer to that question. The number is 47,000. But is that the total number of American soldiers who died in combat in Vietnam, or was that per year? Because per year, 45,000 Americans die from guns. So what do you think it is? Is it 47,000 total or 47,000 per year? This was a major war. Combat operations on a massive scale in Vietnam began roughly in 1965, and it lasted about 8 more years. In 1965 alone, Lyndon Johnson sent close to 500,000 American soldiers into Vietnam. I think something like 3 million soldiers went through Vietnam, but the most at any given time was, it was about, I think 69 was the most at any given time. But in 65, we had close to 500,000 American soldiers in Vietnam. We had advisors there going back to 1955 when the war basically started. So to my younger listeners, I don't expect too many of you to know, given how you've grown up surrounded by gun violence, 47,000, is that 47,000 American soldiers dying on average each year in Vietnam? Or is it the total number of American soldiers who died in Vietnam in combat? What do you think? Well, obviously, because it's so outrageous compared to gun violence in America, the answer is 47,000 total. Those are Vietnam soldiers who died on the battlefield, killed by enemy fire. 47,000 total in a war for America that almost lasted 19 years. It really kicked in 1965, but 19 years fighting in Vietnam. Total, 47,000 men and women died in combat in Vietnam. And in the United States last year, roughly 45,000 people died from guns in 1 year. 35% homicides, 62% suicides last year. King Charles is coming to visit Trump this week. You think he's feeling safe visiting this rifle range of a country? By the way, that's King Charles on his last visit, trying not to smell Trump's diaper. The United Kingdom is comprised of England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Last year, 14 gun suicides, 32 gun homicides. Last year in the United States, roughly 16,000 gun homicides, roughly 28,000 gun suicides. Now, we have trouble keeping exact numbers on this because the gun lobby has placed so many roadblocks on the CDC and the Department of Justice. Not all police departments, there's an undercount because of lobbying by the gun manufacturers. So we don't know the exact numbers. We just know 32 gun suicides last year in the United Kingdom. That would be Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and England. 32 gun suicides. 28,000 gun suicides in the United States. What does that tell you? What, that Americans have better aim? What can you extrapolate from this? What, that Americans are more suicidal than the Brits? Have you ever been to the United Kingdom? Have you ever partied with a Brit? If they're not smoking and drinking themselves to death, they're fighting themselves to death. They are way more suicidal than Americans, which is why they're not allowed to purchase guns. The White House Correspondents Dinner had to be rescheduled because of one man with a gun. Every town USA estimates that gun violence costs $557 billion a year here in the United States, thanks to lost productivity, hospital costs. You got to pay caregivers to look after the victims. It is estimated conservatively that gun violence costs the federal government, not state and local, the federal government, $12.6 billion a year. Every gun death costs the federal government $274,000. That's either for Medicaid, Medicare, police being reimbursed. Every gun injury costs federal taxpayers $25,000. Not talking about state and local. So the exact number of Americans injured by guns is debatable. We don't track it. But some put it as high as 80,000 gun-related injuries a year. You know, Tony Soprano didn't call the police and say, I've been injured. So these are underreported. And gun manufacturers encourage the police to underreport. Now, some say it's as low as about 22,000 a year injured by guns. Do you believe that? You mean more people are killed by guns than injured? It's way higher than the 80,000 that some people say. These are statistics in the realm of armed conflict, right? These are numbers you'd expect to hear coming out of wars in Korea, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Vietnam. Again, hate to bring up Vietnam again, but the number of American soldiers serving in Vietnam, I believe it peaked in 1969. In the spring of 1969, the Tet Offensive was 1968. Nixon got elected, and he promised to end the war by sending in more troops. So we had about 543 Americans fighting in Vietnam at one time, and that was 1969. That's the largest number of American soldiers in Vietnam at one time. That year, 11,780 American soldiers were killed in combat that year in Vietnam. So that's the height of the Vietnam War, 1969. But more American soldiers actually died in 1968. But we had the largest number of soldiers in 1969, and we had 11,780 American soldiers killed that year. So more Americans die from gun violence each year than our soldiers did at the peak year of the Vietnam War. Now, I don't like to confuse you with math, and I want to be honest about numbers because people can do a lot of things with numbers. We had 543,000 Americans in Vietnam in 1969, and 11,780 were killed. That doesn't mean you were less likely to be killed in America. I'm sorry. if you had 500, I'm sorry about this. If you have 543 Americans serving in Vietnam in 1969 and 11,780 were killed in combat, that means you were more likely to be shot to death in Vietnam than here at home. Because I have heard disingenuous people say, you're more likely to die here in the United States than you were in Vietnam, or, that's a lie. So let's not cheat the numbers. It would be convenient, and people say this. I've heard people say it was safer to be in Vietnam than it is now at home. That's not true. But in sheer numbers, just sheer numbers, 3 times as many Americans are shot to death each year than American soldiers at the height of the Vietnam War. And that's real math, and it's terrifying. Again, if you were serving in Vietnam, you had a better chance of getting shot to death. But in sheer numbers, 3 times as many Americans are shot to death each year than American soldiers at the height of the Vietnam War. The number one cause of death for Americans age 17 and under, guns. Not cancer, not car accidents, guns. It used to be cancer, used to be car accidents. Now it's guns. The gun manufacturer's solution is stop wearing seatbelts and smoke more. The Encyclopedia Britannica defines terrorism in these words, quote, the calculated use of violence to create a general climate of fear in a population and thereby to bring about a particular political objective. I'm going to read that again because they've twisted the definition ever since George W. Bush declared a war on global terrorism. Terrorism, the meaning of it, lost its meaning. But this was the definition of terrorism: the calculated use of violence to create a general climate of fear in a population and thereby to bring about a particular political objective, like you blow up the King David Hotel and terrorize British soldiers in Palestine. You kill a lot of people, and that creates a sense of terror and convinces the British maybe we should leave. Terrorism now has come to mean a lot of different things, but terrorism, the true definition of terrorism is create terror among the general population through a single or maybe 2 or 3 more acts of violence. And then you let people's imaginations run wild. What's next? What's next? That's terrorism. The taking down of the World Trade Center was terrorism, partly because while close to 3,000 people died, 350 million Americans were and remain terrified. Now, 3,000 dead is a lot, but it proves that you don't have to kill a lot of people to terrify a nation. I mean, 3,000 is a lot, but that's all it took to terrify our country, for us to surrender our civil liberties and go fight 2 wars against imaginary enemies. You don't have to sink a single oil tanker to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. This is economic terrorism. You don't have to sink a single missile-guided American destroyer in and around the Strait of Hormuz for America and the world to know there isn't a military solution to opening Hormuz back up. That's what terrorism is. When you have to use very few weapons to keep your opponent terrified. That's terrorism. Terrorism is when the enemy is able to occupy our mind and paralyze us with fear so they don't have to work that hard. And that's kind of what Iran has succeeded in doing with the Strait of Hormuz. There's no oil tanker or military destroyer languishing, broken and bleeding in the Strait of Hormuz. They didn't sink one single oil tanker. There was one from Thailand that they damaged, but no American ships in Hormuz have gone down. But we're terrified. That's what terror is. And that is what Pete Hegseth and Trump don't understand in this standoff with Iran. And that is why they have to excuse themselves and let the UN, the EU, everybody else on the planet solve Hormuz, because they don't understand what they're up against, because they're arrogant and stupid, which pretty much is the same thing. Arrogant people don't know what they know and don't know because they're stupid. Trump and Hegseth are stupid. So the United States is different from Iran. Iran uses fear as the end result. They see fear as, they see terror as the solution. But Donald Trump and the United States uses fear as a means to an end. Trump will terrify Americans as a means to push the rounding up of migrants, stricter voter laws, even invoking the Insurrection Act. He's using terror as a means to an end. If you scare the American people sufficiently, they will surrender all their civil liberties, believe anything, and look the other way if you begin locking up their neighbors who happen to be of a different color. Here's how it works. This is the odious Stephen Miller last week on Fox News.
Every single day, you read another horror story about a rapist, a murderer, a thug, a monster, a child predator let into this country by the Democrats, attacking our families, attacking our children, preying on the innocent in our high schools, in our colleges, dragging people to their deaths, beating them senseless, hacking them to death with machetes. That's what you're seeing from Democrat policies. President Trump, by contrast, record deportations, record low crime, record border security, record safety for American citizens.
A fire hose of nonsense. He's saying, thanks to Trump, Americans have never been safer, and yet we're being hacked to death with machetes. Trump is keeping us safe, but immigrants are hacking us to death with machetes. Just say it fast, say it loud, keep it going, and people just believe what they want to believe, and if it's all they hear. That is Stephen Miller and his wife running from last night's White House Correspondents Dinner. That's Katie Miller carrying Stephen Miller's baby. So what does Stephen Miller do? He does what all Republicans do. He relies on anecdotal evidence to sow fear and hatred. We're being hacked to death by undocumented immigrants with machetes. Okay. In 2026, there have been 2 incidents involving undocumented immigrants with machetes. Stephen Miller last week was referencing a machete attack that took place last week in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where a Nicaraguan national broke into the home of his ex-girlfriend and took a machete to her and her new boyfriend. It's a horrible story. Luckily, everyone survived. That's what Stephen Miller was referring to. He must rely on anecdotal evidence because he has no statistics to back up his racist, xenophobic claims. On March 30th of this year, a Guatemalan immigrant broke into the home of his friend and hacked him to death with a machete. And those are all the machete attacks committed by undocumented immigrants this year. Sad, tragic, and especially scary, anecdotally, but statistically, compared to guns, it's nothing to worry about. Interesting thing about what's left of America's gun laws. Now, this is really interesting. I did some research this morning, and it's really interesting. Under federal law, you must be an American citizen or show proof of lawful permanent residence. You have to have a green card in order to purchase a firearm in the United States. So, if you're an undocumented immigrant, you are forbidden by federal law to be able to buy a firearm. I'm surprised the weapons manufacturers haven't changed that law. But I'm going to quote you some studies. Several come from the Cato Institute. Cato Institute, very important. It's a right-wing libertarian think tank. It was founded and funded by the oil companies. The Koch brothers started it. Back in 1977, they wanted a far-right think tank to do battle with specifically Ralph Nader. This was from the Powell Memo. The Powell Memo warned that unless corporate America gets its arms around the flood of information, the United States will start taking care of all its citizens instead of the chosen few. You all know about the Powell Memo, and it's because of Ralph Nader. He was training an entire generation to pass laws that care for the many, not the few. And you can hear the Ralph Nader Radio Hour wherever you download your podcasts. It's a radio show on public radio, but the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, once a week, wherever you get your podcasts. So, Cato Institute is slowly emerging as a reliable font of information. They conduct studies that often disappoint its corporate sugar daddies. A lot of inconvenient results. So I'm going to quote from the Cato Institute, and I'm also going to tell you about a study done looking at the state of Texas, which has the second largest number of undocumented immigrants in the country. Some of you already know this. I've been over this in the past. It's incredibly important. Texas has roughly 2 million undocumented immigrants. California has anywhere between 2.3 million and 3 million. But Texas ranks number one in gun registrations. Texas has more registered firearms than any other state, and 45% of all households in Texas own at least one firearm. Per capita, Texas is not number one in gun ownership, but a lot of people own guns in Texas, and they have a lot of undocumented immigrants. Okay, this is important. Texas, I'm going to talk about the Texas study here. Texas has the second largest number of undocumented immigrants, huge gun-owning population, but those undocumented immigrants are not allowed to own guns. Interesting opportunity for a study. The correlation between gun laws and gun violence, gun laws and robberies committed with a gun. So these are conclusions drawn from both the Cato Institute, some studies done in Texas about the relationship between crime in Texas and undocumented immigrants. And I'm also drawing from reports in Reuters that surveyed all the research that's been done on the relationship between guns and crime and undocumented immigrants and crime and murder. Okay. I like to tell you where I get my information. This is from a study of crime in Texas. It was published in the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, a reliable source. Quote, relative to undocumented immigrants, U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes. This is based on arrest record data from the Texas Department of Public Safety. I'm throwing a lot at you. So let me read that again. Relative to undocumented immigrants, if you compare undocumented immigrants to U.S.-born citizens, okay, U.S.-born citizens are over 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes in Texas than undocumented immigrants. U.S.-born citizens are 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes in Texas than undocumented immigrants. And U.S.-born citizens are over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crimes in Texas than undocumented immigrants. That is all based on arrest record data from the Texas Department of Public Safety. We're talking about arrests. And you know police in Texas are more likely to want to arrest an undocumented immigrant for a crime than they are a U.S. citizen. But when all is said and done, U.S.-born American citizens in Texas over 4 times more likely to be arrested for property crime, 2.5 times more likely to be arrested for drug crimes, and 2 times more likely to be arrested for violent crimes than undocumented immigrants, or as Donald Trump calls them, dangerous animals. The odds are stacked against undocumented immigrants in Texas. You know that. When they have a run-in with the police, they're more likely to get arrested than U.S.-born American citizens. And yet, the stats show more U.S.-born American citizens end up getting arrested than undocumented immigrants in Texas. Why are undocumented immigrants less likely to be violent or commit crimes? I'll get to violent crimes and homicides in a second. So why are statistically, and it's not just Texas, there are other studies, Cato has some on this, why are undocumented immigrants less likely to be violent or commit crimes? Because despite what Donald Trump insists, the countries to the south are sending us their best. Kilmar Abrego Garcia came to America because he didn't want to join an El Salvadoran gang. Immigrants, documented, undocumented, are the best the world has to offer. They always have been. It's why native-born Americans despise immigrants. Immigrants, as far as native-born Americans are concerned, are impossible to compete with. Immigrants are in this country for several reasons. One is they love America. Look at what they've gone through to get here. Reuters reporting that studies show undocumented immigrants who the police can't wait to lock up are half as likely to be arrested for homicide than a U.S.-born American citizen. That's your money quote. Studies show undocumented immigrants nationwide are half as likely to be arrested for homicide than a U.S.-born American citizen. Reuters, legitimate news gathering operation out of the United Kingdom. Cato says undocumented immigrants were 26% less likely to be convicted of homicide than a U.S.-born American citizen who doesn't have to rely on a public defender. So what we can extrapolate from these studies, these statistics, is it's safer to have an undocumented immigrant babysitting your children and your grandparents. It's safer to hire undocumented immigrants to do construction around your home than it is hiring a U.S.-born American citizen. That is borne out by statistics and the hiring practices of building contractors, healthcare providers, daycare centers, and cleaning companies who rely so heavily on undocumented immigrants to work intimately with Americans inside their homes. If these people are as dangerous as Donald Trump, a convicted felon, claims they are, why do undocumented immigrants find so much of their work being inside the homes of Americans, caring for children and grandparents? Undocumented immigrants are less violent and less likely to steal than U.S.-born American citizens. Big business and small businesses rely on immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, because they're more trustworthy than U.S.-born American citizens. The statistics bear this out. U.S.-born American citizens are the dangerous animals, not undocumented immigrants. Trump's war on immigrants is not to benefit the ruling class. It's what Trump uses to win elections, so he's in a position to benefit the ruling class. The ruling class wants undocumented immigrants because the ruling class are all globalists in search of cheap labor. They thrive in a borderless economy where money can travel at the speed of light to every corner of the planet. So this war on immigrants isn't to benefit the people who put Donald Trump in office. Trump uses hatred of immigrants, fear of immigrants, racism to get the votes in order to service, to end up in the Oval Office and then serve the ruling class. You know, like invading Venezuela, bombing Iran, so the price of liquid natural gas and oil doubles here in the United States. There's one other reason I believe undocumented immigrants, and I'm tying this back to guns, and this is really important. I believe the other reason undocumented immigrants have such low crime and homicide rates is they can't buy a gun. I'm surprised nobody talks about this. I was researching this in the morning, and I was saying, this is un-effing believable. Gun control laws work. Look at this. Undocumented immigrants are not allowed to buy guns. They are less likely to commit homicide and violent crimes. Gun laws work. This is why Republicans must lie. They must lie about gun violence, insisting gun violence has nothing to do with gun laws. They say passing gun laws won't reduce homicides, but they do. The highest homicide rates are in states with the most lax gun laws. Very simple reason. More guns mean more deaths. It's why undocumented immigrants commit fewer homicides or violent crimes, because they can't buy a gun. And Trump, well, in order to get elected, he's got to lie and prey on prejudice and racism and fear, convincing low information voters, of which, I hate to break it to you, there are quite a few here in the United States of stupidity. He is able to convince low information voters that they should be terrified of immigrants because they look or sound different. Trump can only win through terror. He terrifies voters. But that's how he uses terror as a means to an end. It's what he fails to get when it comes to Iran. For Trump, terror is a means to an end. For Iran, terror is the end. It's the goal. Just have people terrified that you're going to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed forever. And then our brain does all the work for Iran. We begin to perseverate and game it out and realize how many people are going to die from famine, and we're going to be plunged into darkness. And all they had to do was shut the Strait of Hormuz down without sinking one U.S. destroyer or oil tanker. Hormuz closed because of terror. And for Iran, that's the end, not the means. No tanker bleeding oil in Hormuz to justify Hormuz being completely shut down. All you have to do is say there's some mines there, or we'll shoot you. We'll blow up your tanker. No tanker will risk it. Lloyd's of London won't insure it. That's why Donald Trump will never be able to defeat Iran. He's convinced guns and bombs make him safe. Not if you're fighting economic terrorism, which the closing of Hormuz is. When it comes to economic terrorism, Tomahawk missiles are no weapons. They're not weapons. And I have no idea how he extricates himself from this mess. This is worse than COVID. He does not have a way out other than pulling out, giving up, and letting the UN solve this, which is the solution. But pride, American pride, will end up paying double for food and gas, and there'll be famine in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia because Donald Trump and America can't admit we elected a cretin and we screwed the entire planet. I got to wrap it up. Thank you for listening. I'm doing live shows every Sunday night at 6:05 p.m., Tuesday night and Thursday night at 6:05 p.m. Eastern. And I'm sticking with this schedule for many reasons. And we drop a clip at 8:30 p.m. Eastern 7 nights a week. We find a little 5-minute highlight and we put it up at 8:30 p.m. Eastern 7 nights a week. We go live at 6:05 p.m. Eastern Sunday night, Tuesday night, and Thursday night. I got to wrap it up. But here is Texas House Republican Brandon Gill. He's a huge MAGA supporter. And I just want to play you an example of what these people really believe. One of the gifts of the right-wing podcast world is you get to hear what they really believe. So this is Texas House Republican Brandon Gill talking with Benny Johnston, one of the top MAGA podcasters. I would be lucky to have 1/1,000,000th of his followers. Here is Benny Johnson on the left talking to Texas House Republican Brandon Gill, and they are not outliers in the Republican Party.
It's because our culture, I believe, in many ways is superior to other cultures across the globe. We've got to recognize that not all cultures are equal. They're not all equally compatible with America's governing framework. They don't all have equal dignity. And we ought to recognize that bringing in third world countries where some lunatic is grilling a cat in an American park where children are playing around with is a culture that is incompatible with our own.
Okay. There's been one piece of anecdotal evidence of an immigrant who I think was having problems mentally, grilling a cat. And yet you want to ban H-1B visas. You don't want Indian immigrants coming here because they're too compatible with the American way of life and they're brown-skinned. Go on.
Speaking of incompatibility, sometimes it's important to compare just broad numbers. The average IQ in Haiti is 68. The average IQ 68 and 67, depending on where the numbers are. I have Grok pulled up here. Between 67 and 68. Average IQ in America is 105. How is that supposed to be compatible? How is that supposed to work? Same thing with Somalia, by the way. The average IQ in Somalia hovers around 70, and that's the threshold for mentally handicapped, according to most psychological theses here in this country. So, how are you supposed to square that, Congressman?
Wow. Thank you for that information. And thank you for sourcing it off of Twitter. Benny Johnston pulls a lot of things out of his ass, and I don't want to get into that. You've probably read about the rumors, but who's he quoting here? Where does he get the idea that the average IQ in Haiti is 67 based on a post? No sourcing, but he looks like you can trust him, right? If you're stupid and you lack critical thinking, you'll believe the average IQ in Haiti is 67. This is what they believe. This is what they have to believe. They continue.
Well, that's the problem, and perhaps there's a link between this and between the welfare usages that you see from migrants in many countries, which is that whenever you bring in a population who largely has not really interacted with what we would consider, the modern American world and the modern American economy, you have a very hard time staying afloat, and the result is that they become a net drain on economically on the rest of the society.
So this is just pure racism. No facts. We've been over this. They're net positive. Undocumented immigrants are net positive. They pay more into Social Security, which they can't collect. They pay more into unemployment insurance, which they can't collect. They pay more in taxes than they take back in social services. They're a net gain, and we're desperate for them. But racism, one of the things I've come to learn is, as they say, racism is a stubborn stain here in the United States. We were founded by white supremacists. And I apologize. I still am shocked by how people like this guy and Donald Trump are willing to burn all the bridges, set fire to our villages, just to punish people of color. You can't overstate the role that pigmentation plays in Republican politics. The hatred for others is the end. Trump kind of uses it as a means to an end to serve the oil company so he can get elected president. But when you get down into the weeds with this guy Benny Johnson or Brandon Gill and their constituents, they would rather starve to death than see a person of color thrive. Interesting thing about this guy, Texas Congressman Brandon Gill. He is Dinesh D'Souza's son-in-law. So Brandon Gill married the daughter of Dinesh D'Souza, the conservative author. And most of you know who Dinesh D'Souza is. He was born in Mumbai, India. Wasn't born in this country. And he immigrated to the United States in 1978 and became a U.S. citizen in 1991. And on May 20th, 2014, Dinesh D'Souza pled guilty in a Manhattan federal courtroom, pled guilty to violating federal election campaign laws. And Trump later pardoned him. So maybe they're right. Maybe Dinesh D'Souza is proof that immigrants bring crime with them. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. I kept it short today. Sorry about that 3-hour nightmare last Thursday. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room. If I made any mistakes tonight, please issue a correction, or please correct me. I issue corrections. I'm going to go. One of the things I'm trying to do is keep the chat room going. I notice people really start talking right about now in the chat room, but I haven't figured out how to keep it going past the live stream. So what I'm going to do, if you're watching me live, is I'm going to go into the comment section down below. I will go there for 15 minutes and I will chat with you for 15 minutes in the comment section down below. Please subscribe to this channel. Please subscribe to my newsletter. Please like this episode. That's the best way for me to remain in your feed, is if you like this, hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and I got to remember to do that at the top of the show and not at the end. Thank you. I will see all of you Tuesday at 6:05 p.m. Eastern, and I'm going to go into the comments section once the chat room is closed off. Thank you.